So this is an important section. I'm sure they're going to invite Richard and Christine Locke to join us, and they're going to talk about their son Matthew. I do need to put up a warning where this segment is going to talk about suicide. Richard and Christine came to me. I do a drop-in clinic, a drop-in sort of session every Friday for people to come talk to answer any questions I can. They'd seen me on Good Morning Britain and talking about ADHD, talking about the challenges, and talking about the risk of suicide. And they came saying, we've never seen anyone do that, talk about how challenging ADHD, in particular, talk about the risk of suicide. And they said something extraordinarily powerful that frankly chilled me to the bone, and because they said, we just wish we'd known. We wish we'd known that there was this risk. And they are making it their mission to change that. And they have a presentation to talk about what happened with Matthew, and I'm going to invite them in now. Hello, Richard, and hello, Christine.
Hello. Hi, Andrew. Good to see you again.
Nice to see you again. Yeah.
It's great to see you too. I think it's extremely brave and courageous what you're doing, and thank you for being here and sharing Matthew's story and what happened. And I think you told me just prior to this, you said you were in Matthew's bedroom.
Yes, on his computer in his bedroom.
Yeah, where he should be. But but we need to speak about this. This is so important. If we can just help somebody else or make everybody aware of the risks that ADHD, if it goes untreated, can cause devastation. Yeah.
And for those that don't know, the statistics are pretty harsh. So we know that it's 1 in 4 women or girls, 1 in 10 men or boys with ADHD will at some point try and take their own life. And that's 4 times over baseline for men and boys. It's I think it's 7 to 8 times over baseline for women and girls. It's a very, very serious issue. For the first 2 years of this charity, we were almost exclusively funded by the parents of children who had taken their own life. Right? So it is very significant, and it's a very, very big deal. You've got a presentation which I'm going to essentially hand directly over to you, and because I think it's in your words. I think that's important.
Yeah.
Thank you, Henry. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're very keen to share Matthew's story. Unfortunately, not a great story in terms of we believe Matthew's took his own life, but we really didn't know the background behind the causal link between addiction and suicide. And we'd like to just go through and talk about some of the issues that we had and some of the things that were missed. You're going to introduce him?
Yeah, this is Matthew. When Matthew took his life, he was just 19. A wonderful boy, caring, kind, help anybody, gregarious, loved to sing karaoke, but had problems with his emotions. And at 14, in summary, he was diagnosed with Asperger's, and well, we go from there. But we always felt that there was something else.
So, just in summary, Matthew was born on the 12th of July in Ormskirk Hospital and lived in McGill. Went to Merchant Taylor's School in McGill, went on to do A-levels, where he did business and design. from there went and started the first year at Edge Hill University and did his first year in business. From an early age, Matthew had a very strong fixation in terms of vacuum cleaners. That was initially a concern, but he went on to make a big thing out of it. He ended up becoming involved with both the press and TV and made his name from doing that.
Yeah, from an early age, we knew that Matthew was a little bit different. He was rigid in his interests. We only had the one child, and we didn't really understand ADHD, to be fair. And Matthew wasn't classic, and that he was not disruptive in school, but he did have a hyper focus. And I would say now, with hindsight, we could see he struggled to regulate his emotions as a toddler, a baby. He'd be quick to cry, get upset, overly excited. You put that down to the terrible twos, and we actually did take Matthew to the doctors at the age of 4, a little bit worried about him being so rigidly interested in vacuums and not really playing with toys, or even though he was very happy and liked social interaction, he didn't make friends easily in playgroup, just being fixated on what he wanted to do. Anyway, as I say, the GP had just said, well, we'll do a referral. But after a referral, we were told, no, he's fine. Just keep an eye on it with the teachers. Boys are generally a little bit behind anyway in how they develop, etc. So we went on to primary school, and basically I was always at the school wondering if he was keeping up with the others, because he'd seemed to not be really interested in his homework, in reading, although he liked to be read too. So yeah.
I guess just picking up on the presentation, that from an early age, it was very evident Matthew knew what he wanted to do and had his own will. And as it said there, at 9 months, he actually managed to climb out of his cot. We thought he was stable and settled for the night, and climbed out of a cot that was about 3-4 foot high and managed to crash down. And cause us concern, and that carried on. As we said, genophobe was probably nothing that we could have had and worked for us. Matthew came to notoriety for his love of vacuums. He started off repairing a nan's, one of his friend's nan's vacuums, and that then grew and grew and grew into a business. He created his first YouTube video on vacuums when he was just 13 in 2017, and that's gone on to have 92,000 views. And he's put together a whole suite of vacuum and other product repairs. And he started the Vac Mat, and that's where things got started. From there, the papers finally picked up on Matthew, including Washington Post and a number of other publications, not only in the UK, but right around the world. Eventually, Matthew's story got out there, and he was picked up by ITV This Morning. We went on initially with his collection of over 100 vacuums that he had. He was, as I say, he knew his own mind, Matthew, and at the end of the first interview, Philip Schofield was asking about a specific type of Hoover, and Matthew stopped Philip in his tracks and said, sorry, you've got it wrong, Philip. This is a whole higher level of filtration than HEPA filtration. This is hospital grade and beyond. To that, Philip returned with, right, you're going to be one of the regulars on the show. And fair enough, Matthew did, and ended up doing 8 appearances on the show, became a regular with viewers, and very much liked. Not only did he manage to conquer the UK, I know the conference is going out to Australia, so yeah, he actually also managed to get an appearance on the morning show in Australia, which meant us getting up at about 3 o'clock in the morning to actually do that and present out. Matthew in school ended up with a love of politics. When some local MPs visited, Matthew wanted to start making a difference in and around the community. He started off Conservative, but finally jumped across to Labour, knowing that that was the only way you would get elected in a very, very safe Labour ward. You can see some of the photographs there of Matthew doing community projects around the local community, and got known very much for doing that. Wouldn't say no to anybody, would really, really love what he was doing. Within that time, he got finally elected as a councillor, became one of the youngest councillors in the country. Following on from that, he was then shortlisted to be a not just a town councillor, but also then to be elected onto Sefton Council for Labour as well. He loved his politics, he loved getting involved, and got to meet a lot of famous faces while doing that.
Yeah. However, when Matthew was growing up, his rigid interests caused bullying in school. So we knew, he wasn't developing in the way the other kids were interacting. Everybody we spoke to, the GP, the teachers, the SEN, they all said, no, everything's fine, don't worry. Matthew didn't hold his pen correctly, and I used to think, he looks really awkward the way he's writing. Again, go back to the teachers, he just doesn't seem to be able to write for a long time, gets tired. No, that's fine, don't worry. I kept pushing, but thinking, well, okay, maybe I'm being paranoid. The thing is, I didn't understand ADHD. I wasn't aware of all the symptoms and traits of ADHD and the co-occurring conditions, dyslexia, emotional dysregulation. Matthew was having some tantrums, which again, people were putting down to, he's a toddler, he's 4, he's just started primary school. So each time I'd ask and stop and we'd have concerns, they'd be allayed by somebody saying it's fine. If I'd have known what I know now, and I have to say this is just with hindsight, with Matthew now not here, if I'd have understood ADHD at the moment, it's almost like, the classic naughty schoolboy, disruptive, can't sit still, doesn't do as he's told. Matthew could sit still. He would do as he's told. He would zone out, but they were the things where perhaps he went under the radar, basically. And then once we then hit secondary school, then we were hit with further problems with not doing homework, making excuses, saying he didn't have homework, and regular meltdowns that we thought, well, okay, now we're coming up to another phase, the teenage years. So he was referred to Alder Hey, and we filled out all the forms, and he was actually diagnosed with autism. And to be fair, I didn't think that you could have ADHD and autism together. That's another thing we were unaware of. So yeah, I accepted that. Obviously, the diagnosis, Matthew seemed fine with that. I think he didn't open up to us. We'll never know how he felt about that, but he seemed indifferent to it. But it explained his obsessional behaviour with the vacuums and his love of all things cleaning. So we went on with that. Yeah.
I think if you go back to the slides in terms of where we are, I mean, Matthew had a very rigid fascination with vacuums. Ultimately, he turned it into something really, really positive, but that was evident. And in the early days when he was 4, we took him to Alder Hey, but basically we got told, oh, you don't really want to label him, you don't want to put him into a system. He seems okay. So we walked away from that, and that obviously was the early telltale signs of what was going on. By 13, the problem had become a lot bigger in terms of where we are. Do you want to talk a little bit more?
Yes. Once he was assessed, they said dyslexia was diagnosed, and he didn't enjoy school at all, whereas he had got through it in primary. He had actually enjoyed it, but once the peer group realised someone's a bit different, then the bullying did start, and we were often up at the school. We were told, well, there are notes missing from his work. So we said, well, what could that be? They referred us to an educational psychologist, and they come back with some accommodations, no reference or direction towards suggestion of ADHD. So we went along with it. Now, the thing is, what we know now and what we knew then, this is where it just breaks our hearts, and we cannot take time back. But we were dealing with somebody neurodiverse and who couldn't focus, who couldn't concentrate, well, could, but on the things he wanted to. And yet, as parents, we were saying, just focus, just think about it, just calm down, just think like everybody else does. And he couldn't, and we didn't understand that. And we feel the years of the misunderstanding and him trying to fit into a neurotypical world and family, that had to impair him on a daily basis. And eventually, at 14, we self-referred to CAMS because we were worried he would have repeated meltdowns, he would pull his curtain rail down, and then he would be sorry, he didn't know why he did it, but we were worried. CAMS didn't follow up on anything. We filled in forms, and we've looked at these forms since, and these forms clearly had all the symptoms of ADHD, which we didn't recognise ourselves as parents. However, the primary care team should have seen that. There were classic symptoms: low frustration, low tolerance, meltdowns, always busy, not really able to sleep well, highly strung. So it was all there, and yet nothing was picked up on, except, well, you don't want him in this system, really. Once he's in the system, it's hard to get out, and that was CAMS. So we walked away from that.
Yeah, I guess just to put some meat on the bone. So in terms of 2009, Matthew was first referred, but that was at quite an early age. 2018, he was referred again into Alder Hey. We completed an ASEBA form, a questionnaire with Matthew. This is been missed, and we can find no evidence of this in the clinical notes, although that we've still got that form. It was never reviewed. The killing thing for us is that it showed the prevalence of ADHD at that time. Along with that, when we self-referred into CAMS, we filled the same form in, slightly different, 3-4 months apart, that showed exactly the same prevalence and the same conditions. What was also missed is that the school were asked to fill in a similar form, and they actually filled it in with a teacher who didn't know Matthew. So that was filled in incorrectly in a lot of respects and missed the ADHD diagnosis. Unfortunately, Alder Hey used a school form rather than the parent form and never cross-referenced the two. Moving on to 2022, Matthew, we took to a diagnostic service in Liverpool. He went through a number of tests, one of which being the QB test. And every one of the tests that he took, he showed a prevalence for ADHD. So the diagnosis was very, very strong, and he had the combined type of ADHD. One thing from that service, or a couple of things really. First and foremost, when we've now gone back and looked at those forms and taught ourselves how to analyse them, the ODD, oppositional defiant disorder, that was in there was also not communicated to us, and that we believe is a big miss in terms of the sort of significance of that within ADHD. Ultimately what happened. The other part of that is that we, in the application process to have Matthew assessed, mentioned in 3 different places on the form that Matthew had started to have an alcohol problem. And again, given that, and given Matthew was interviewed in that process, we were involved, we were taking Matthew to do the assessments there. That was never picked up as being an issue, and what ultimately transpired is that alcohol issue became an alcohol addiction, and that was a problem for Matthew. Finally, after that process, he was referred to see a psychiatrist. There's now some concerns about that in terms of his experience level, and was working outside of the Care Quality Commission. So from the ASEBA tests, these are all the issues that were diagnosed or were shown as being clinically significant. And all of those were not really explained and given any time or any information, but that's because the ASEBA test was missed and not utilised by Alder Hey. Sorry, I'm just jumping right the way through.
So in summary, there were opportunities where Matthew could have been told that there was a link with ADHD and the increased risk of self-medicating through alcohol and substance misuse. That was never raised. Once he'd been diagnosed at 17, he was just 18. That was never given as a factual possibility of ADHD. So as parents, we were worried sick about Matthew. We were happy he'd found friends because he had found it hard to make friends. But at 17, he'd found a new social life. He was enjoying life. He loved going out. He went to festivals and we were happy. But then we realised there was a problem. Now, not once did we know there was a link between alcohol and the possible self-medication for somebody with ADHD. Matthew was not on medication from the diagnosis. Another thing of medication is there needs to be more education out there, more awareness of what medication can do and can't do. But there is a myth out there generally, and I know people I speak to, oh, you don't want to medicate. Well, we think if Matthew would have been correctly titrated, followed up properly, he may not have self-medicated. And research does show that if somebody is medicated for ADHD, that there is probably an 80% chance of mitigating the risk of substance abuse and alcoholism. We didn't know that link. We didn't know. And that is, we thought we were arguing with a teenager who was just going through a phase, who could pull back. He wasn't drinking or doing things to get high, or he was, as an ADHD brain, he was calming his brain, which we see now, but we only see this since Matthew's passing, which is absolutely catastrophic for us. We cannot believe that two people who we think pretty intelligent, held down good jobs, we understand what's going on, we think in the world, but ADHD, it's so much more than a hyperactive, inattentive, restless person. There were so many co-occurring things. We didn't know that dyslexia was another condition that often goes with it. That ASD, in probably up to 50% of cases of ADHD, is present, and vice versa. If ASD, then there's ADHD, then ASD is probably about 30% prevalent. So all these points of contact with GPs, with the NHS when it was missed, you know, I suppose we're calling for, if somebody's been diagnosed with autism, then surely we need to rule out ADHD. The symptoms are very similar and they cross over. So I know that can be difficult, but there were very clear traits of ADHD. Now we've educated ourselves or think we have and know a lot more, but never once. And there is a risk of alcoholism with autism as well. Nothing was given to us. Parents need a fact sheet, a simple, clear fact sheet to say there could be a problem, especially at a red flag age of adolescence, when an ADHD child, a teenager, starts going out, peer pressure hits. Oh, try this drink, try this drug. There are festivals. It's out there now. We know that kids will try things. And for a neurotypical, they may be able to try something once or twice and leave it at the door. But for ADHD, when it's not being recognised, treated, or medicated, supported, understood, then we're looking at a pretty poor, a high risk of a poor outcome.
Just in terms of, to clarify, Matthew, when he was 13, going to 14, was diagnosed with autism. But I think, yeah, the point is between 50 and 70 people have ADHD within that group, then the prevalence is to assume that is something that they would have. And that's something we'd like to push, and we've spoken to a number of people about. It was, again, an opportunity missed in terms of Matthew's case. So just moving on in terms of the timeline, Matthew obviously continued to have problems. His meltdowns were there. As Chris said, he did move schools and start to find a new social outlook to life, and that became more and more prevalent over time. He continued in terms of schoolwork and some of the other stuff he was doing with this morning. We were really, really concerned about the focus and the worry about going to the university and being a self-starter within university made us go back and look at it all again. And, you know, we closed down to the fact that Matthew had got a diagnosis, and that was autism. But when we looked at it again, then finally the light went off, and Chris came into the bedroom one night and said, I think Matthew's got ADHD. Look at all of these symptoms. And yeah, when we ticked every one of those boxes, that's why we went back and re-looked at it and opened that up and went for the diagnostic service and tried to get that diagnosis. Matthew continued on. By the time of 18, he was going out just about every night drinking. Actually, probably the only time that he ever didn't drink in that last year was the night before he would go on this morning. And I'd be with him and quite shocked that that wasn't something. As we said later on, he carried on in terms of taking on further responsibilities and getting involved with Sefton Council and starting to take that forward. I think that the big worry, and looking back now, is we saw the alcohol issues, and they were playing in terms of day in, day out, night on, night out. We were focused on trying to fix that, understand that, and actually we just were totally blind to that link between ADHD. And, you know, those opportunities had been missed when we talked to the specialists, when we talked to the experts, and those people hadn't informed us. You know, despite us even asking, Matthew's drinking very, very often. You're prescribing him medication. How will that work with it? You know, those opportunities were missed.
Once also, when he was prescribed the medication, at that point, there was no conversation about how that medication would really help him. And it was just a case of, so you'll take this for 2 weeks and we'll check on you, check your blood pressure in 2 weeks. It should be able to help you focus, see how you go. Kids push back at that age. They don't want to take medication. They want to be their own person. And he did push back. He took it for a while. He said it made him feel as though his heart was racing. So again, us not understanding ADHD, what medication can do, why he was drinking. We didn't want to push the medication. So we said, well, okay, if you feel like that, don't take it. He was getting more irritable, but of course this was, you put alcohol in the mix and this will only exacerbate any ADHD symptoms, which basically alcohol will give you ADHD symptoms on top of ADHD symptoms, and that was never going to work. We were never going to get through without knowing that link, and we did not know it. We spoke to friends, neighbours, spoke to his teachers at sixth form. Nobody ever saw the link or suggested perhaps the ADHD has got something to do with that. We can't believe that we didn't know that. Only from now Matthew passing, and I've been looking online, I've actually typed in ADHD and addiction, etc., ADHD and suicide. That's when all the information come up with those two words. But for anybody who hasn't been crossed by suicide or addiction, they're not going to type those words in. They've got to be put out there. We've got to be told about that, the risks with ADHD, what they can be, the increased risks. for the sheer impulsivity is one of the traits, and the risk taking, the lack of executive function to fully think through what someone's going to do. It makes total sense now reading that. But at the time, we just thought we had a teenager who was enjoying going out too much, and it would be a phase and it would pass. And we couldn't be more devastated, shocked. We still can't even, we don't think we still believe it. It's a year since Matthew passed away on the 8th of September last year. And we just cannot believe we didn't understand the possible links and the increase of suicide and his mental health, obviously being damaged by drinking and the ADHD. And we were in a vicious circle that we couldn't break because we couldn't see the link. And we see now that there is research where 20% of alcoholics, if you dig deeper, have probably got undiagnosed or misdiagnosed ADHD. We see now the impact it has on families, the person who lives with it every day, the impairment, the naysayers who don't believe it's a thing. It's not we never believed it was a serious condition. We didn't understand it, and that's the thing. We have to all understand it. We tried to speak to counsellors who were dealing with alcohol problems. We rang up. We were speaking to them about our son, saying we're worried. Now, really, counsellors, we all should be ready to say, right, a drink problem, a teenager, can I ask, are they neurodiverse? Do they have ADHD or autism? Because that is a risk if they are drinking and if they're not being treated or supported. That could be a risk. That could be a reason why they're drinking. It's through self-medicating.
So from us on the 7th of September, the 8th of September, that was a day that changed our life forever. Matthew went out on that evening of the 7th, left home, went to the pub to meet with his friends. That next morning, early hours of the morning, he returned home. Couldn't get through and decided to jump over the side gate and go, and what we thought was spend the night in the log cabin at the bottom of the garden. What we've subsequently learned is he texted one of his friends, "This is the last time you'll see me," to which he got a very bland reply, which still frightens us in terms of where it is. His last words were, "I wish I were dead." And unfortunately, that became true, and he took his own life that night. We really still blame ourselves for that lack of knowledge, that awareness of the situation. We saw and knew he was going down there and being on his own, but we didn't think for 1 minute that it was going to be a night that defined our lives and has changed our lives forever.
So going forward now, in Matthew's name and his legacy, we have to change things. We have to educate people, and the waits for ADHD diagnosis are just not acceptable. I went online, I looked at inquests last night, suicide, ADHD, those 3 words I typed in. Within an hour, 45 minutes, I had 28 cases in the UK of people who'd taken their lives with ADHD under the age of 26 in the last 3 years. They were just ones I come across in 40 minutes, all with Matthew's story, either misdiagnosed, didn't understand what they had or were waiting for treatment. Some were waiting for medication. It was taking 6 months for them. They come off medication, they wanted to go back on. It took 6 months for them to get that medication, and in that 6 months, all these people here, inquests due to suicide, ADHD, and the lack of awareness, the lack of treatment, lack of education. It's absolutely horrific, these numbers, and it can be so easily changed just by education, just by understanding ADHD. I say just, we have to look at the NHS, their mental health system, and school, because timing is absolutely critical. Once each day a person has to deal with ADHD and what they feel they can't do and their emotional dysregulation. Each day has got to be another hit of anxiety, and depression are the biggest mental health problems that we have in the world. And underlying that, there's a lot of misdiagnosed ADHD as the primary condition. So yes, we need change, as simple as fact sheets being given out to parents, educational courses, schools bringing in classes to understand ADHD, to understand their children in class who have ADHD, and to be patient, to be understanding of the condition, so they're not bullied and victimized, which layer on layer is going to affect their mental health right through their life. So we do not want to be here. Thank you for listening. We feel like we've gone on, but please understand, we just want the awareness out there. If someone would have told me at any point, anybody said, oh, do you know that there's a risk of addiction, and maybe that's why Matthew's drinking, we could have come with this in a totally different way. We could have had a different outcome. And if Matthew would have been diagnosed at 13 when we took him for assessment, and possibly medication was involved, psychotherapy, we could have had a different outcome. Matthew loved life, and we know he did not want to take his life. He's been an impulsive downward spiral, but there's no way Matthew would have wanted to end his life.
Yeah, I think you take away any of one of those things, obviously the ADHD, but you take away the substance abuse in terms of that, and we wouldn't have ended up to the suicide. So it's about understanding the links between those. As Chris said, in conclusion for us, it's absolutely vital that people get a timely diagnosis, and that's absolutely critical. The right medication, intervention and support is around. Further reaching out to education for parents, for teachers, and for the clinical clinicians out there, because there's enough of those that we've spoken to who just don't know about the risks. And those risks linked to the comorbidities of addiction and suicide are phenomenal. They're huge risks, and that suicide, we would never want anybody to feel like we feel at the moment, which is just total devastation from the loss of our only child as well. We need to make sure that the awareness of that increased risk of poor outcome in later life is understood, yet that can be changed with the medication and support behind everybody else. We're keen to set up and try and make a positive impact. I don't know whether it's a way to try and keep Matthew alive in our own hearts and in our heads, but we want to advocate for change, for certainly within the NHS website. When we did get the diagnosis, that was the turn-to place that we went to, but it doesn't mention suicide, it doesn't mention addiction, and that impairs so many people. we'd like to find a way to get the QB test available into schools so that they can do that early diagnosis and get the benefit for children, and change the outcomes that they have. Last but probably the most important, Henry, you started off this talking about we just didn't know, we didn't understand it, and there's so many people we talk to. We attend suicide groups now, and I think we said it the other day, but when we talk around the room openly, the amount of people that then come up to us and say, "Oh, I think a relative had ADHD, they took their own life." It's very, very similar story, and we keep hearing the same stories. We've got to stop that. We've got to break that link, and we've got to break that cycle. So we're keen to set up a charity. We're not a charity, but we're trying to set one up at the moment. I'll leave you with my favourite picture of Matthew there, in terms of spending a day at Dyson, which he wanted to do all his life, and luckily myself and him had the opportunity to do that. But God, I miss him. God, I miss him. Thanks, Henry.
Thank you for listening.
You guys are so brave for doing this and talking about Matthew and what happened. It's obviously been a privilege to listen to, and completely heartbreaking. And your bravery encouraged you to talk is something else, and what you're looking to do is we're obviously on the same fight in terms of trying to change understanding of ADHD. It's why when I do a lot of my media, I talk about the link with suicide, because I want people to know, and I want to adjust people's thoughts on how challenging ADHD actually is, because so many people just don't realise. And
and as you said, it was a strange feeling when we got to see you talking about it. And as we said, you're probably one of the first people we've seen out there actually talking openly about it. But first thing we've got to do is get that message out there and get that understood by people, and only that way can we make change and affect change.
Yeah, I completely agree. I recognise yeah, I recognise how hard that's been, and obviously how important it is. So we've left that up, so there's the people can scan those. So
we've said
more.
It's in its infancy, and there's a GoFundMe page, again, both in their infancy, but we've got to set up and go through all the rigmaroles of setting up to be a charity. And all
Been there, done that, yeah.
we might have
a bit of an effort.
Questions about that one as well.
Oh, happy to help. I think this is the point to, the point to, so thank you very much, and I'm sure this is not the end of us doing anything together, in terms of us raising this understanding and awareness. You are incredibly brave. My heart's broken for you, and thank you for sharing with everyone today.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Henry.
Thank you.
Yeah, if we can change the outcome for one person, it will be all worth it.
Absolutely. Thank you to them. I'm going to sign off to the next session. Thank you for joining for what was an extremely important section, and I think the main takeaway and the most important thing is that this happened to Matthew. He is not alone, right? This is something that happens far too often. We know about the link, we know, and we talk to the research where they pulled the data on others. It is a very serious issue, and so much can be done to change those outcomes, and we need to make that change happen. Thank you for joining for this.